The history of the world wars is typically told through grand narratives: the clash of empires, the rise of totalitarian regimes, decisive battles that turned the tide of conflict. We remember D-Day, Pearl Harbor, Stalingrad, and Hiroshima. We study the strategies of Eisenhower, Churchill, Stalin, and Hitler. These are the pillars upon which our understanding of 20th century warfare rests. Yet beneath this familiar narrative lies another story entirely. History, as we have come to understand through decades of archival research and declassified documents, is rarely shaped solely by the obvious forces we celebrate in textbooks. Instead, the trajectory of global conflict has frequently been altered by individuals, innovations, and incidents so seemingly insignificant that they were overlooked in their own time, only to be recognized decades later as pivotal moments that changed everything. This presentation examines forgotten stories from both World War I and World War II that fundamentally altered the course of these conflicts in ways contemporaries could never have anticipated. These are not tales of famous generals or celebrated heroes. Rather, they are accounts of intelligence breaches caused by personal vanity, technological innovations born from desperation, diplomatic accidents that reshaped alliances, and moments of individual courage or failure that cascaded into consequences affecting millions. We will approach this analysis through rigorous historical methodology, drawing upon primary sources, recently declassified intelligence documents, military archives, and peer-reviewed historical scholarship. Each case study presented here has been verified through multiple independent sources and represents current historical consensus or, where debate exists, acknowledges the range of scholarly interpretation. Our investigation will proceed chronologically and thematically, examining how small actions produced disproportionate effects through the complex systems of total war. We will analyze the mechanisms by which these forgotten incidents achieved their outsized impact and consider what they reveal about the nature of historical causation itself. Section 1. The Zimmermann Telegram and the Accidental Codebreaker. The context of 1917. By January 1917, the First World War had devolved into a brutal stalemate. The Western Front stretched across Belgium and France in an unbroken line of trenches, barbed wire, and devastation. Millions had already perished in battles like the Somme and Verdun, yet neither the Allied powers nor the Central Powers could achieve a decisive breakthrough. The conflict had become a war of attrition, measuring progress in yards rather than miles, in thousands of casualties rather than strategic victories. The United States, under President Woodrow Wilson, maintained an official position of neutrality, though American sympathies increasingly favored Britain and France. German submarine warfare threatened American shipping, creating tensions between Berlin and Washington, but isolationist sentiment remained powerful in American domestic politics. Germany's military leadership understood that American entry into the war could prove decisive, tipping the already precarious balance against the Central Powers. The telegram itself. In this context, German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann composed what would become one of the most consequential diplomatic communications in modern history. The telegram, sent on January 16, 1917, was addressed to Heinrich von Eckart, the German ambassador to Mexico. Its contents were explosive. Germany proposed a military alliance with Mexico in the event of war between Germany and the United States. In exchange for attacking the United States and tying down American forces, Mexico would receive financial support from Germany and, upon victory, would recover the territories of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, lands lost to the United States in the 19th century. The strategic logic was clear. Germany planned to resume unrestricted submarine warfare on February 1, 1917, knowing this would likely provoke American entry into the war. By creating a military threat on America's southern border, Germany hoped to keep U.S. forces occupied in North America rather than deploying to Europe. It was a desperate gambit reflecting Germany's deteriorating strategic position. The interception and the forgotten codebreaker. What transformed this diplomatic maneuver into a historical turning point was not German strategic planning, but British signals intelligence, specifically the work of individuals whose names have been largely forgotten by history.
The counterfactual question remains provocative. Without American intervention, would the Western Front stalemate have continued? Would Germany have secured a negotiated peace? Would the Russian Revolution have evolved differently without the expectation of American intervention? We cannot know with certainty, but the weight of historical scholarship suggests that American entry was decisive in determining not only the outcome of the war, but the shape of the post-war settlement that would lead 2 decades later to the Second World War. Section 2. The Wind Talkers, Navajo Code and Linguistic Warfare. The Pacific Theater's Communication Crisis. The Pacific Theater of World War II presented unique challenges for military communications. The vast distances between islands, the speed of amphibious operations, and the complexity of coordinating air, naval, and ground forces created an unprecedented demand for rapid, secure communication. Traditional encryption methods proved too slow for tactical battlefield communications, creating dangerous delays when commanders needed real-time coordination. Japanese intelligence had demonstrated considerable success in breaking American codes. By 1942, U.S. military communications were routinely compromised, giving Japanese forces advance warning of American operations and enabling them to prepare defensive positions or arrange ambushes. The need for an unbreakable code that could be used for tactical battlefield communications became urgent as American forces prepared for the island-hopping campaign that would characterize the Pacific War. The Forgotten Proposal of Philip Johnston. The solution came not from military cryptographers or communication specialists, but from Philip Johnston, a civil engineer and the son of missionaries to the Navajo Nation. Johnston had grown up on the Navajo reservation and was one of fewer than 30 non-Navajos who spoke the language fluently. His background was entirely civilian, with no military training or intelligence experience. In February 1942, Johnston read a newspaper article about a Louisiana National Guard unit that had experimented with using Native American languages for military communications during training exercises. The article sparked a realization. The Navajo language possessed characteristics that could make it the foundation for an unbreakable military code. Johnston understood several crucial facts about Navajo that made it uniquely suitable for this purpose. First, the language had no written form until the 20th century, and even then, literacy in written Navajo was extremely limited. Few people outside the Navajo community could read or write the language. Second, the language's structure was completely unlike European or Asian languages, making it exceptionally difficult for non-native speakers to learn. Third, Navajo speakers were sufficiently numerous to provide the personnel needed for a large-scale communications program. Fourth, the language's complex tonal qualities meant that even recordings would be nearly impossible for non-speakers to decipher or reproduce. Overcoming institutional resistance, Johnston approached Major General Clayton B. Vogel, commanding general of the Amphibious Corps Pacific Fleet, with his proposal in February 1942. Initial reactions were skeptical. Military communications doctrine was built around standardized procedures and equipment. The idea of using a Native American language seemed amateurish and impractical to many officers. Questions were raised about whether sufficient numbers of Navajo speakers could be recruited, whether the language could accommodate military terminology, and whether the system could be implemented quickly enough to affect the ongoing war. Johnston arranged a demonstration. He recruited 4 Navajos living in the Los Angeles area and staged a test in which they transmitted and received messages faster than conventional coding machines could operate, without any of the messages being intercepted or decoded by observers. The demonstration convinced Vogel, who authorized a pilot program in May 1942. The development of the Navajo Code. The initial cadre of 29 Navajo recruits arrived at Camp Elliott, later Camp Pendleton, in May 1942. These men, known to history as the original 29, faced the challenging task of developing a code based on their native language that could accommodate the technical and tactical vocabulary of modern warfare. The code they created operated on 2 levels. First, they developed a phonetic alphabet in which Navajo words represented English letters. For example, the Navajo word for ant, Wolachi, represented the letter A, bear, shush, represented B, and so forth. 3 different Navajo words were assigned to frequently used letters to prevent pattern recognition. E, for instance, could be represented by elk, ear, or eye. The telegram was transmitted through multiple routes, including via transatlantic cable that passed through British-controlled stations. British naval intelligence, operating out of Room 40 of the Admiralty Building, had been intercepting and attempting to decrypt German communications since the beginning of the war. The key figure in this operation was Reverend William Montgomery, a scholar of ancient languages who had been recruited into signals intelligence despite having no formal training in cryptography. Montgomery and his colleague Nigel de Grey worked on the encrypted Zimmermann telegram for weeks. The German message had been encoded using cipher 0075, a code the British had partially broken through, captured German code books, and painstaking cryptanalysis. What made Montgomery's contribution particularly significant was his linguistic intuition. His years studying ancient texts had given him an unusual ability to recognize patterns and fill in gaps where portions of code remained undeciphered. By late February 1917, Montgomery and de Grey had produced a workable decryption of the telegram. However, the British government faced a delicate problem. Revealing the telegram's contents to the United States would also reveal that Britain was intercepting and reading diplomatic communications passing through ostensibly neutral channels. British intelligence needed a cover story, the intelligence operation. The solution came through another forgotten figure, a British agent in Mexico City, who obtained a copy of the telegram from the Mexican Telegraph Office. This copy had been re-encrypted using an older German code that the British could claim to have broken more easily, providing plausible deniability for their more extensive code-breaking capabilities. British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour presented the decrypted telegram to the American ambassador on February 24, 1917. The timing was calculated to maximum effect. The telegram had been sent weeks earlier, but British intelligence waited to ensure the authenticity could be verified and the political impact maximized. The American reaction and historical consequences. The Zimmermann telegram's publication in American newspapers on March 1, 1917, produced a seismic shift in American public opinion. What had been a divided nation with substantial opposition to entering a European war, suddenly faced evidence of a direct threat to American territory. The proposal to dismember the southwestern United States and return territory to Mexico struck at fundamental issues of national security and sovereignty. The impact was magnified when Arthur Zimmerman himself, in an act of diplomatic incompetence that historians still find baffling, publicly confirmed the telegram's authenticity on March 3rd. Rather than denying the communication or claiming it had been fabricated by British intelligence, Zimmerman admitted he had sent it, apparently believing that honesty was the best policy. His confirmation eliminated any possibility of dismissing the telegram as British propaganda. On April 2, 1917, President Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war against Germany. 4 days later, the United States formally entered World War I. The American Expeditionary Forces would eventually number over 4 million personnel, with 2 million deployed to France. The arrival of fresh American troops in 1918, along with American industrial capacity fully mobilized for war production, proved decisive in breaking the stalemate on the Western Front and forcing Germany to seek an armistice in November 1918. Historical assessment. The Zimmerman telegram episode reveals several crucial aspects of how forgotten stories shape history. First, the individual expertise of Reverend Montgomery, a scholar of dead languages recruited into an entirely different field, proved essential to decrypting the telegram. His specific combination of skills was neither planned nor anticipated by military planners. It was a fortunate accident of wartime recruitment. Second, the complex intelligence operation required to reveal the telegram without compromising British code-breaking capabilities demonstrated how intelligence work operates in layers invisible to public awareness. The dramatic narrative we remember, the shocking telegram that brought America into the war, obscures the meticulous, largely anonymous work of signals intelligence personnel. Third, Zimmerman's decision to confirm the telegram's authenticity represented a catastrophic failure of diplomatic judgment that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the war. Had he denied it, American entry might have been delayed or prevented entirely, potentially changing the outcome of the First World War. Finally, the delayed recognition of the code talkers reveals how historical narratives are constructed and how certain contributions are systematically overlooked. The classification of the program meant that the code talker's story was absent from the immediate post-war accounts of the Pacific Campaign, and by the time declassification occurred, the narrative of the Pacific War had already been established without them. Their reintegration into the historical record required active efforts by historians, veterans advocates, and Native American communities to challenge the canonical narrative. The counterfactual remained striking. Without the Navajo Code, would the Pacific Campaign have taken longer? Would American casualties have been significantly higher? Would the atomic bombs still have been necessary to force Japanese surrender, or might the war have ended differently? While we cannot answer these questions definitively, the evidence strongly suggests that the Navajo Code talkers shortened the Pacific War and saved countless American and Japanese lives. Section 3. The Accidental Spy, Juan Pujol Garcia, and Operation Fortitude, the strategic problem of D-Day. By 1943, Allied planners were preparing for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe. The success of the amphibious landing scheduled for June 1944 would depend critically on achieving strategic surprise. While the Germans knew an invasion was inevitable, the specific location, timing, and scale had to remain uncertain for as long as possible. The challenge was formidable. Any cross-channel invasion would require massive concentrations of troops, equipment, and shipping in southern England. Concentrations that could not be hidden from German aerial reconnaissance. The Germans maintained a sophisticated intelligence network in Britain, and their military leadership was actively preparing for the anticipated invasion. Somehow, the Allies needed to convince German high command that the invasion would occur somewhere other than its actual target, the beaches of Normandy. This requirement led to Operation Fortitude, an elaborate deception operation designed to convince the Germans that the main invasion would target the Pas-de-Calais region, the narrowest point of the English Channel and the most obvious choice for an amphibious assault. The deception would employ phantom armies, fake radio traffic, dummy landing craft, and false intelligence reports. At the center of this web of deception was an individual whose contribution remained almost entirely unknown until decades after the war, Juan Pujol Garcia. The implausible volunteer, Juan Pujol Garcia, was a Spanish citizen with no intelligence training, no military experience, and no obvious qualifications for espionage. Born in Barcelona in 1912, he had worked variously as a hotel manager, chicken farmer, and cinema operator. During the Spanish Civil War, he had fought briefly for both sides, developing a deep antipathy to fascism while remaining skeptical of communism. By the time World War II began, Garcia was living in Lisbon, Portugal, unemployed and increasingly alarmed by Nazi Germany's expansion. In early 1941, Garcia made a remarkable decision. He would volunteer his services to Britain as a spy. His motivations were primarily ideological. He believed Nazi Germany represented an existential threat to civilization and felt compelled to contribute to its defeat, despite having no obvious means of doing so. Garcia approached the British Embassy in Lisbon and offered his services as an intelligence agent. The British rejected him. He approached them again and was rejected again. The British intelligence services, understandably skeptical of unsolicited volunteers with no credentials, saw no use for this eager but apparently useless Spanish civilian. The elaborate deception, Garcia's response to British rejection, demonstrated remarkable creativity and determination. If the British wouldn't recruit him as a spy, he would become a spy independently and establish credentials that would force the British to take him seriously. Specifically, he would convince Nazi Germany that he was a loyal agent spying on Britain, then use his position within German intelligence to provide deception material to the Allies. Garcia approached the German embassy in Lisbon and offered his services as a spy against Britain. Unlike the British, the Germans accepted. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, provided Garcia with training, invisible ink, questionnaires about British military installations, and instructions to travel to Britain and begin reporting. There was one significant problem with this plan. Garcia had no intention of actually going to Britain. He couldn't obtain a British visa, and even if he could, he had no network there and no means of obtaining the military intelligence the Germans expected. Instead, Garcia went to Lisbon's public library. Using British tourist guides, library books, railway timetables, and newsreel footage, Garcia began inventing intelligence reports about Britain entirely from Portugal. He created a fictional network of sub-agents supposedly operating across Britain: a pilot, a seaman, a Welsh nationalist, a Portuguese businessman, each with their own cover identity and area of expertise. He fabricated military observations based on maps and guidebooks, describing troop movements, convoy schedules, and military installations he had never seen. The remarkable fact is that the Germans believed him. For months, Garcia sent detailed reports to his German handlers, who codenamed him Arabelle. The Abwehr found his information credible and began paying him substantial sums for his intelligence work. British discovery and recruitment. British intelligence services, monitoring German communications through the Ultra program that had broken German Enigma codes, began noticing references to a highly valued German agent called Arabelle, operating in Britain. This was alarming. The existence of a successful German spy network in Britain represented a serious security threat. Counterintelligence services intensively searched for Arabelle, but found nothing, because, of course, he was in Lisbon, not Britain. Eventually, British intelligence traced Arabelle to Garcia. When they discovered that this supposedly dangerous German spy was actually a freelance anti-Nazi operating from a Lisbon library, they immediately recognized his value. In April 1942, the British finally accepted Garcia's original offer of service. He was brought to Britain, given the code name Garbo, supposedly because he was the best actor in the world, and integrated into the double-cross system, Britain's program for capturing and turning German agents. Operation Fortitude and D-Day Deception. From 1942 until the end of the war, Garcia, operating as Garbo for the British, while the Germans still believed he was their agent Arabelle, became the most valuable double agent of the war. His fictitious spy network expanded to 27 sub-agents, each with detailed backstories, regular reporting schedules, and specialized areas of intelligence gathering. The Germans never suspected the entire network was fabricated. The double-cross system used Garcia as the primary channel for feeding deception material to German intelligence. His reports were carefully crafted by British intelligence officers to be credible, mixing accurate but harmless information with strategic deceptions designed to mislead German military planning. The culmination of Garcia's work came with Operation Fortitude in 1944. The goal was to convince the Germans that the main Allied invasion would target Pas-de-Calais, while the Normandy landings were merely a diversion. Garcia's fictional spy network reported on the fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group, Fusag, supposedly massing in southeastern England under the command of General Patton for an assault on Pas-de-Calais. These reports were corroborated by physical deception, dummy tanks and landing craft visible to German reconnaissance, fake radio traffic simulating a large military formation, and double agents confirming Garcia's intelligence. The Germans, already predisposed to believe Pas-de-Calais was the logical invasion point, found the intelligence from their trusted agent Arabelle convincing. The crucial moment came on June 6, 1944, D-Day itself. Garcia sent a message to his German handlers reporting that a major Allied operation was underway, directed at Normandy. This message was carefully timed to arrive too late for the Germans to reinforce Normandy before the landings, but early enough to establish Garcia's credibility. 3 days later, on June 9th, Garcia sent a follow-up message, based on intelligence from his fictional spy network, warning that the Normandy landings were a diversion and that the main invasion targeting Pas-de-Calais was imminent. German High Command believed this assessment. For 7 crucial weeks after D-Day, Hitler and his generals kept the powerful 15th Army, with its 19 divisions stationed in Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. These forces could have been rushed to Normandy to crush the Allied beachhead while it was still vulnerable. Instead, they remained in Pas-de-Calais because German intelligence, relying heavily on Agent Arabelle's reports, believed the main attack was still coming. Historical assessment and recognition. The impact of Garcia's deception on the success of D-Day cannot be overstated. Military historians generally agree that the first weeks after the Normandy landings were the most vulnerable period for Allied forces. If German reinforcements had been committed immediately and in full force, the invasion might have been contained or even repulsed. The fact that substantial German forces remained in Pas-de-Calais during this critical period, based on false intelligence that Garcia had helped create, was a decisive factor in the campaign's success. For his services, Garcia received the Iron Cross from Germany, one of their highest military decorations, and was simultaneously made a member of the Order of the British Empire by the British government. He remains the only person to have received high military honors from both sides during World War II. Yet, Garcia's story remained classified for decades. After the war, fearing reprisals, he faked his death from malaria in Angola and disappeared. British intelligence maintained the fiction of his death, and Garcia lived in obscurity in Venezuela until 1984, when a military historian tracked him down and revealed that he was still alive. Only then did his extraordinary contribution become public knowledge. Garcia's story represents forgotten history in multiple senses. First, his contribution was deliberately erased from the historical record for decades due to classification and his own desire for anonymity. Second, even after declassification, the complexity of his deception operations and the elaborate nature of the double-cross system meant that his role remained difficult for popular audiences to understand. Third, his initial rejection by British intelligence, his apparent lack of qualifications, and his implausible volunteer offer meant that he never fit the archetypal spy narrative that dominates popular culture. The counterfactual questions remain profound. Without Garcia's intelligence channel, could Operation Fortitude have succeeded? Would German forces have been committed to Normandy earlier and in greater strength? How many more Allied casualties would have resulted from a more vigorous German defense? Might D-Day have failed entirely, forcing the Allies to reconsider their strategy for opening a Western front? We cannot answer these questions with certainty, but the weight of historical evidence suggests that Garcia's contribution was essential to the success of the Normandy invasion and thus to the liberation of Western Europe. An unemployed Spanish chicken farmer with no intelligence training fundamentally altered the course of World War II through creativity, determination, and an elaborate fiction that the German military never questioned. Section 4. The radiochemist who saved England, Reginald Victor Jones, and the Battle of the Beams. The strategic bombing threat in 1940, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany. The fall of France in June had eliminated Britain's major continental ally, and the United States remained officially neutral. German invasion plans required air superiority over the English Channel, leading to the Battle of Britain, a sustained air campaign intended to destroy the Royal Air Force and break British civilian morale through strategic bombing. German strategic bombing presented a technical challenge that British defenses initially struggled to counter. Night bombing raids allowed German aircraft to evade British fighters, but nighttime navigation posed problems for German bombers attempting to locate specific targets. Bombing accuracy decreased dramatically at night, limiting the effectiveness of raids against military and industrial targets. The Luftwaffe developed a solution: radio navigation systems that would guide bombers to their targets with unprecedented accuracy, even in darkness or adverse weather. These systems, if they worked as designed, would enable Germany to conduct devastating precision night bombing campaigns against British cities, industrial centers, and military installations. British radar and fighter defenses, organized primarily for daylight interception, would prove largely ineffective against accurately guided night raids. The Forgotten Scientist. The British response to this threat came not from military officers or intelligence professionals, but from Dr. Reginald Victor Jones, a 28-year-old physicist who had been working in university research when the war began. Jones had studied at Oxford University, specializing in spectroscopy and quantum physics, fields that seemed completely unrelated to military intelligence or aerial warfare. In September 1939, Jones was recruited into Air Ministry Intelligence, initially to provide scientific analysis of German weapons. His appointment was almost accidental. The Air Ministry needed someone with scientific training who could interpret technical intelligence, and Jones happened to be available and willing to serve. He had no intelligence experience and knew nothing about the operational requirements of strategic air defense. This apparent lack of qualification would prove irrelevant. Jones possessed exactly the combination of skills needed for scientific intelligence: deep understanding of physics and radio technology, to analyze fragmentary evidence and construct coherent theories, and willingness to challenge conventional wisdom when evidence demanded it. The Oslo Report and Initial Evidence. In November 1939, the British Embassy in Oslo, Norway, received an anonymous package containing technical details of German weapons development. This Oslo Report, as it came to be known, described various German military research projects, including rocket development, proximity fuses, and radio navigation systems for aircraft. Most intelligence officials dismissed the report as too comprehensive to be credible. Surely no single German scientist or engineer would have access to such wide-ranging secret information. Jones took the Oslo Report seriously. His scientific training allowed him to recognize that the technical details were too accurate and sophisticated to be fabrications. Someone with genuine access to German weapons research had compiled this intelligence, and despite its anonymous origin, it warranted careful analysis. The report mentioned Knickebein, described as a radio beam system for blind landing and navigation. Jones filed this information, but initially lacked sufficient context to understand its full significance. Throughout late 1939 and early 1940, fragmentary intelligence references to German radio navigation continued to accumulate. Intercepted communications, prisoner interrogations, reconnaissance photographs of unusual antenna installations in occupied Europe, the detection of Knickebein, The breakthrough came in June 1940, following the interrogation of a German bomber crew shot down over Britain. The crew mentioned Knickerbein during questioning, describing it as a radio beam that guided bombers to their targets. They seemed surprised that British intelligence didn't already know about the system, suggesting it was widely deployed and routinely used by the Luftwaffe. Jones immediately recognized the implications. If Germany had developed an operational radio navigation system, British cities would be vulnerable to precision night bombing. He faced skepticism from senior officials who doubted that such a system could work or that the Germans possessed such advanced technology. One senior RAF officer famously declared that the reports of radio beams were impossible because beams could not be bent around the Earth's curvature, revealing a fundamental misunderstanding of radio wave propagation that Jones had to patiently correct. Jones convinced the Air Ministry to authorize reconnaissance flights to search for the suspected radio beams. On June 21, 1940, a specially equipped aircraft detected the Knickerbein signal, a radio beam transmitted from German stations and designed to guide bombers to targets in Britain. Further investigation revealed that Knickerbein worked by transmitting two overlapping radio beams. When a bomber flew along the path where the beams intersected, the pilot heard a steady tone. Deviation to either side produced dots or dashes, allowing the pilot to navigate back to the beam's center line. A second beam intersected the first over the target, signaling when to release bombs. The system was elegant and, at the time, highly effective. German bombers could follow the beams even in complete darkness or heavy cloud cover, achieving targeting accuracy impossible with traditional navigation methods. The Battle of the Beams, Jones faced the urgent problem of neutralizing Knickerbein before it could be used to devastate British cities. He proposed a countermeasure system based on electronic warfare principles that were largely theoretical at the time. British transmitters would broadcast signals on the same frequencies as Knickerbein, creating false beams that would mislead German bombers away from their intended targets. This countermeasure required rapidly developing new equipment and deploying it across Britain. Engineers at the Telecommunications Research Establishment worked around the clock to create transmitters that could jam or subtly alter the German navigation beams. The challenge was to interfere with the guidance system without the Germans realizing their beams were being compromised. If the Luftwaffe knew their navigation system was unreliable, they would simply develop a new system or modify their frequencies. The British countermeasures, codenamed Aspirin, became operational in August 1940. German bombers, following Knickerbein beams, found themselves guided to incorrect locations, sometimes missing their targets by several miles. Bomb damage in targeted cities decreased significantly, while open countryside and less critical areas received bombs intended for strategic targets.